Hello, my name is AJ Goldsby. I'm a life master from Pensacola, Florida, and I wanted to bring you another video. This is game number 8 of the World Championship series that I'm doing on the World Championship games. There were recently a match was played in November of 2013, and Viswanathan Anand was the reigning world champion, and Magnus Carlsen was the challenger. And the match was played in Chennai, India. And anyway, I was wanting to do one of my fans had requested that I do a series of videos on all of the games that were played. And after some thought, I decided I would go ahead and do it simply because I didn't see any other series of videos out there. And also, too, I thought on the shorter games, on the draws, it wasn't really necessary to go into great depths of games. Maybe just talk about the theory a little bit. And but anyway, let's go ahead and get into the game. This is game number 8 of the World Championship game that was played in Chennai, India. It was played on I believe, the 19th of November, 2013. This is the 8th game. Magnus Carlsen was white, and Viswanathan Anand was black. Anand was the Indian fellow. He's was the reigning world champion of the world prior to this match. But anyway, without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into this game. Starts off again, Magnus Carlsen is white. He plays e4. I do believe this was the very first time in the match that Carlsen played e4 for whatever reason. E5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6. Now we have a little bit of a surprise, okay? Very early in the match, I mean, not very early in the match, late in the match now. Early in the match, we saw some drawn games. The first 2 games are drawn. Later on in games 3 and 4, probably Anand, especially black, had all the winning chances in one game. And then games 5 and 6 were decisive games. Game 5, Anand described as a heavy blow. And then we had a couple more draws. And this is game 8. And previously, I don't believe Carlsen had opened e4 in any of those games. And the one game where, the first game where Anand was white and he opened e4, we saw a Carlsen. Then we saw a series of Ruy Lopez's or Spanish games, and Carlsen played his very favorite Berlin defense. Here we see a kind of a turnabout. You know, basically Anand is now black and he plays the Berlin defense against Carlsen. I guess the idea is, what do you do when you're faced with your very favorite opening? I think what Carlsen does here is he makes a very sensible decision. He decides that he would go ahead and just avoid any theoretical discussion and avoid the main line. And he basically plays castles, which is the main line. But after knight takes e4, he gets into a byline here. The main line is a d4 here, and then we get into the main line. And I think you can see that game, that one, it's the first one that is explored in, I believe, is the 4th game. But anyway, if you want to look at those games, you can get into those games later. Game 4 and game 6 are, I believe, were the very heavy struggles where Anand was white and Carlsen was black, and the Berlin defense was played. Well, here, again, Anand, he kind of changes things around. He plays the Berlin defense against the Ruy Lopez or Spanish game, basically asking Carlsen the question, how are you going to meet your main line? Carlsen, rather than playing the main line here, just very briefly, we'll just take a quick look at the main line. The main line is d4, knight d6, bishop takes, pawn takes, d takes e5, knight f5, queen takes d8, king takes d8. This is the line that was played in the, I believe it was the 4th game. And then later, when in the 6th game, when Carlsen also played this, Anand bypassed this line completely. Instead of playing castles here, he responded with d3. Instead of playing after a knight f6, he played d3 there. And that was what was played in the later on in the 6th game. So basically, avoiding any discussion here, Carlsen, again, getting back to the actual game at hand, it started off e4. Again, Carlsen is white and Anand is black. 2 knight f3, knight c6, 3 bishop b5, knight f6, white castles, which is the main line. But after knight takes e4, Carlsen avoids the main line with d4 and instead plays rook e1. This is a very sensible line. I've used this line myself. It gives white a little bit of an edge. You get a totally symmetrical pawn structure, but I believe it keeps the game more alive in the fact that you avoid giving up the bishop pair, and also too you keep the game alive and avoid the exchange of queens. So anyway, black plays knight d6. That's the book move there. The idea is to immediately challenge this bishop on b5. Knight takes e5. Now it's a little bit of a trap, and basically the trap is if knight takes b5, looks like you just dropped a piece. Of course, that's a terrible double question mark or triple question blunder, because white simply responds knight takes knight on c6. Discovered check. It's check on the black king from the white rook there on e1. And then, of course, it doesn't matter where the black queen goes. Black he can play his bishop there, and the knight takes d8, or if he plays queen e7, knight takes e7, so the black queen is lost. So basically the whole point after knight takes e5 is that taking the bishop on b5 is simply a mistake. So black probably should simply develop. And knight takes knight is shown in theory to give white a tiny bit of an advantage. So, Carlsen just plays, Anand plays a sensible developing move here. Just simply bishop e7. And now here, Carlsen responds, with the move that I like here. This is, to me, the most sensible move, and that's just simply playing bishop f1. And, that's a very sensible move there. And, it's just to save the bishop. The idea is to keep the game alive. You can even redeploy. I've seen a couple of Grandmaster games where this white later on plays g3 and bishop g2, and this light squared bishop is redeployed on the long diagonal, which is a very effective use of the pieces. And going further in the game, we have knight takes e5, rook takes e5, black castles, white plays d4. I think white has a very tiny, very small advantage here. And but it's also a very drawish type of position because the pawn structure is symmetrical. Neither side has an advantage, in the bishop pair. I mean, both sides still have their bishops. Black has a little bit of a problem here with this knight. This knight doesn't, really have a good square right now. It's kind of in the way. To be completely honest, black should move this knight as soon as possible and redeploy it to another square. That's probably something that he needs to, do as quickly as possible. But anyway, going back to the opening book here, for a while we're gonna continue down the main line. I'll let you know when they deviate from the main line. Bishop f6, that's the main move there. Rook e1, and now the normal move here, the main line here, is knight f5. The move actually played in the game was Anand decided to play rook e8. That's also a fairly reliable move, but just very quickly, we'll just show what the power book shows for the main line here, which is knight f5. That would be a new variation, and we have c3, d5, bishop f4, c6, knight d2, knight h4, bishop to d3, bishop f5, bishop takes, knight f3, queen d7, and we can pretty much here say that and now white plays queen d2, ra e8, and then we can pretty much say there that the opening is over, and it's completely equal position. I don't think either side is going to have much advantage. The rooks are going to get traded off on the e-file, and that pretty much does it for the entire game. I mean, that would be an equality for black. All the heavies are coming off, at least the rooks. One set of rooks is coming off on the e-file, if not both sets of rooks. So I think it's going to become very hard for either side to play for a win. The pawn structure is completely symmetrical, and we have the same kinds of pieces on the same kinds of squares. So don't really see much of an advantage for either side. So that would be the main line there. But going back to the actual game now, we're just going to quickly review the game in case we lost you. The actual game was e4, e5, to knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6, Carlsen castles. Anand plays knight takes e4. He's going to play the Berlin defense against, Carlsen, basically to see what Carlsen does. Carlsen chooses to, avoid the main line. Instead, plays a nice sideline here. Rook e1, knight d6, knight takes e5, bishop e7, bishop f1, knight takes e5, rook takes e5. white castles, and now d4. So now we're left with a relatively playable position. I think this is a fairly good position. It's certainly a playable position for either side. And you know, it's a game. I mean, white might have a tiny space advantage because of his pawn on d4, but it's not very much. Bishop f6, hitting the rook on e5. This causes the rook to retreat. Rook e8, and again, the main line here was knight f5. Carlsen avoided that just to keep the game alive. I think he plays c3, which is also a very logical move. Rook takes e1, queen takes e1, and here I think Anand kind of blinked. If he wanted total equality here, he could have played queen e8 or queen e7. And if, you know, Carlsen wanted to, he could exchange queens. But Carlsen has already shown that if in that kind of environment, he'll exchange queens and he'll grind on an opponent literally forever. So, you know, for whatever reason, Anand avoids the exchange of queens here. He plays knight e8. The computer move, just so you know, I'm running Fritz in the background just to avoid errors and, you know, point out any interesting tactics. And the Fritz is recommending knight f5 here. And I've gone over this game with Houdini and a couple other engines, and that seems to be the indicated move there. The idea is to play knight f5 and d5 as quickly as possible. That's going to lead to equality, very similar to the line we just looked at a couple of minutes ago. But anyway, here, you know, Anand just plays a very simple move, knight e8. Pretty much the same idea here. We're going to see in a second why that knight retreats to e8 instead of f5. He has an equalizing idea in mind. He's going to exchange pieces, so he's obviously at this point, I think Anand, he doesn't see any chance to make advantage, so at this point he just wants to make sure that he doesn't get a disadvantage and wants to make sure that he gets at least a fully playable position. Bishop f4, d5, bishop d3, g6, and this is a very safe move. I mean, you don't want a knight or a bishop coming to the square, and this gives the black king luft. In other words, no, there's not going to be any mates on the back rank. But the primary reason for this g6 square is to keep pieces off these two squares and also allow the knight to come to g7. And we'll see why that's important in just a second. White continues developing, 15, knight d2. Black plays knight g7, and now we see why the g6 move was so important. It's so this knight could go to g7, later it can go to e6, which is a very solid square, but also the main reason is even if the white queen managed to get over to c2, or play, like say white plays queen b1, black can still safely play bishop f5 there and deny white. Bishop d3 is a very good post for the light squared bishop, for white's light squared king bishop. So if black can exchange off this piece, I think it pretty much guarantees a draw. So knight g7, again, that's so that black can play bishop f5 on coming up very quickly there. Queen e2, c6, rook e1. White's dominating the e file, but it's nothing to be concerned about because black simply has bishop to f5 rather here on move 17. 18, bishop takes f5, knight takes f5, knight f3. White currently has a tiny bit of an advantage just because he's dominating the e file, but black can fix that very quickly with moves like queen d7 and king e8 and rook e8. That'll solve all those problems. And also too, if white ever plays h3 with the idea of g4, black can just play h5 to prevent white from kicking this knight. So this knight on f5 is very hard for white to displace, and unless white can kick this knight off to a bad square, and even if this knight were kicked, it could come back to d6, and then it has outpost squares on both e4 and c4, e4 probably being the better square simply because it's in the half open file. But anyway, this is a pretty good solid position for black. Black plays again. Now he retreats here. He plays knight g7. Now the idea is, having exchanged off the light squared bishop, now the knight can redeploy to the e6 square. Bishop e5. Black simply, white rather, is simply looking to trade down now here. I think at this point both players realize pretty much that the game is going to be a draw, so they're simply trying to hold the balance and not make a mistake. Knight e6, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, knight e5, rook e8, knight g4, queen d8, queen e5, knight g7. There you go. Now all the heavies are coming off. Now we see a little bit of a trick here, just a tiny bit of a trick. It caused a flurry on one website. I believe it was that CC website. Some people even thought Carlsen had blundered, but it's actually just a little tactical trick. Queen takes e8 check, knight takes e8, but now we have this move, rook takes e8 check. Black must recapture, otherwise after king g7, rook takes, and white is simply a rook and a knight up, so that's not even remotely possible. So black must recapture. Now we have knight f6 check, king f8, knight takes e8, king takes e8. Now because of the tactics, you know, all the material has been regained. We actually have what could have been a very interesting king and pawn ending. I've played these kind of endings in tournaments, and what I might do in a king and pawn ending is simply play something very simple like f3, king f2, king e3, and this allows the white king to get centralized, and basically you got to hope for a mistake by your opponent. But king and pawn endings can be very tricky. I've even found, you know, experts very oftentimes will make a mistake in these types of endings. They'll either push their pawns too far forward or make a mistake of that type, or they'll simply, you know, put their king on a bad square. And obviously in king and pawn endings, that's extremely important. I used to play a lot of what was called pawn-only chess, and in that variant of chess, it was on the chess.com server, not the current chess.com, but chess.com as it was called back then. That was a nice little interface. It was popular about 10 or 15 years ago. I was the pawn-only champion of that server for a long, long time. And in 1 year, I won both the 1-0, the 3-0, the 5-0, and the 15-minute at pawns only. And I had beaten pretty much everyone else on the server in those forms of chess. So, but anyway, pawns are, you know, very interesting. To be completely honest, you know, they could have won all out, but both players are such a high caliber. I don't really see this as such a simple position, symmetrical pawn structure, etc. I don't really see anybody making a mistake here. But basically what Carlsen does now is he ensures the draw. He begins to lock things up after f4 and now f5. Now a great deal of the elasticity of the position has gone out of the position, and now a draw is all but assured. King f2, b5, b4. Again, Carlsen's just making sure that, you know, neither side is going to, you know, slip in with their king. King f7, h3, h6. White plays h4. Now Anand plays h5. And again, this shows that neither player were, you know, the game was for them was pretty much already drawn. It'd be almost impossible for either player to make a mistake. If I were playing a lower rated player here, what I would do here is, as white rather, is march my king up to h4 and then try to make something happen, because generally if I have my king up one rank further than my opponent, if he runs out of tempo, he's going to be in trouble. In fact, that would be a very nice way of doing it. The computer wants to play king e3 here, but that's probably just going to result to some dancing from side to side and result in a draw. But after h4, h5, the pawns are now locked, and neither king can penetrate, you know, into the opponent's position. There's no pathway for, barring a blunder, there's simply no pathway for either king to get to the opposite side of the board. So literally now the two kings can just move him back and forth until the sun burns out. Of course, we'll get a draw by repetition long, or the 50 move rule long before that happens. But at this point, both players agreed to a draw. That pretty much does it for my coverage of Game 8. The video ran about 18 minutes. I wanted to be a little bit shorter at that, but at the same time, I wanted to cover the opening and also some of the ideas that were addressed. And I've gotten quite a few emails about these games. I guess people, because I've always been making web pages and now videos on the World Championship games ever since as long as I've been involved in chess and as long as there's been an internet. So I get a lot of emails especially World Championship time. The other day I had well over 100 in the midst of the World Championship. I had over 100 emails. People ask me all kinds of questions. Why was what opening chosen, et cetera, et cetera. You know, grandmasters are just like everyone else. They have their favorite openings. You know, I mean, you know, Carlsen likes the Berlin defenses black and certain other openings, and Anand likes the Ruy Lopez's white. And he can play just about any line. So everybody has their favorite openings. I mean, even super grandmasters and world champions are not immune to having their favorite opening. And, you know, it's been a very interesting match, and it certainly has been a pleasure, and it's been, you know, very entertaining for me and a learning process to do these videos on these World Championship games. I thank you for watching my video. If you would like, if you enjoy my videos and my web pages, and you'd like to make a donation so that I can continue, you know, doing this kind of thing, and you would like to support my efforts, please feel free to do so. Go to the PayPal website, that's www.paypal.com, and make a contribution under my email account, which is LifeMasterAJ@yahoo.com. There's no periods or underscores or dashes in there, just LifeMasterAJ at yahoo.com. And that's my email address, and that's how you can make a donation to me, and I will get that through PayPal. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you watch all the videos in this series, and please email me. And even if you do not make a donation, please feel free to give me your feedback. Tell me what you think, and maybe any suggestions for any improvements or any ideas for any future videos. Thank you for watching my video, and have a great day.